Well, Mary Peters, I'm very excited to be with you here this morning, and thank you so much for taking time to join with us as a former ADOT director and former national leader in transportation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we're here to talk about the 50th anniversary of ADOT. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your career with ADOT, when you started, and some of the different really neat experiences you had from the start.
Sure. Well, I started with ADOT in 1985, in the spring of 1985, and I was working for a lady called Virginia Powell, and she was running the consulting services department at the time. She hired me as her secretary. She had an opening there, and all the discussion at that time was about the Prop 300, the first bill that would, first local option tax that would be dedicated to transportation, first in the nation actually. So she knew their work was going to increase substantially, but she gave me an opportunity to get in on the ground floor and get some experience with ADOT. And I remember her telling me that if I could negotiate with people who carried knives to meetings, I could probably negotiate with consultants.
And in just about 13 years, you moved from that starting position to be, ADOT director, and you were here in 1999, which was about halfway through 25 years that ADOT had been a state department. So what were really the biggest challenges then as we were moving toward the 21st century?
Yeah, I think the challenges, especially at the 50th anniversary, the Public Works Department, I think, was a lot like ADOT was in 1974 when the agency was created, and great foresight on behalf of people who did that, and Bill Ordway, of course, the first director of the Arizona Department of Transportation. But we knew by then, and in succeeding years especially so, that it was more just building roads and operating roads. It was a much bigger palette of responsibilities, if you will, and Bill Ordway was just such a great director. But things moved so fast between when I started in 1985 until the time I left. It was like the department was moving at warp speed, taking on new responsibilities, doing new things, really being a multimodal transportation agency, and concentrating more on how the system operated, not just how to build it, how to maintain it, but how do we operate it and get the maximum efficiency out of the department.
And that landscape was so different in the 1990s compared to today. What would you say were really some of the seeds that led to the great progress we've had in these last couple of decades?
Well, I give credit to my predecessors who served, Charlie Miller, director of ADOT, Chuck Cowan, who came in, and he first brought me to the director's office, and then succeeding leaders after that, but really good people who knew what they were doing and saw not, I use the Gretzky quote sometimes, they looked not where the puck was, but where it was going to be, and helped move the project in that direction, or the company in that direction. I also credit the Transportation Board, really exceptional people who have worked over time on the State Transportation Board and helped move the agency, again, forward, being more multimodal. And funding, of course, was a big issue. I mean, we depended almost entirely on the gas tax until the 1985 initiative that gave us the half-cent sales tax. So those are things I think those leaders and people in places in the organization were what helped move it forward. And I'll tell you a story about Chuck Cowan. I headed up the consulting services office, the office that Virginia Powell headed when she hired me. And so I did procurement of professional services, and then we had the contracts that we let, the road building contracts that we let out of another office, and then procurement, Sally Al-Hashimi was there, the pens, pencils, and things like that. And Chuck called the three of us into his office and said that he wanted to try to build toll roads in Arizona, and we needed to develop an RFP and do some things like that. And I have to tease that Dave and Sally couldn't get out of the room fast enough, and it was like, okay, I'm the one that's going to do that. And that was something very new to our state. Still isn't successful. I tell people it was a spectacular failure on our part, but it moved our thinking forward to how things could be at the time. So those directors and folks who gave, he and I'd say Vern Doyle, who was later became the head of the consulting services office, they gave us the freedom to do what we needed to do to get things accomplished. Not just that old organizational disability of this is how we've always done it, but how do we do this now? How do we do things today? And one of the things that Vern allowed me to do was write RFPs for multiple road projects for consulting groups. So we didn't have to do a one-on-one. We could get 5, 6, 7 consultants hired under the same RFP.
So we talk a lot about innovation, like you're talking about, and also collaboration.
Yes.
There's about 800 managers and supervisors within ADOT today. from your time and then through today, how would you say those folks who are leading the people all throughout the organization, what kind of a role do they play in the organization's success?
Well, they play a very important role. And I think that, to use the term, the tone of the organization starts at the top. And so people who are managers and supervisors look to that tone. And so when we were then looking at more innovation, looking at doing things differently, giving people the opportunity to say, hey, I've got an idea how we could do this, maybe it's a little bit different, and giving them the freedom to go forward with that. That is what I think supervisors and managers at ADOT today do. You're not just the boss in the old adage of the boss. You're a team leader. You're someone who helps the people who you're privileged to serve get where they want to go and do what they need to do.
And that professional development is so important.
Oh, so important.
The leaders and managers play a key role in that.
You know, Larry Bonine and I, we started a leadership class for new supervisors, and we would personally teach that. He was the director at the time, and I was the deputy director. And I remember telling the managers and supervisors, when you first become a supervisor, there's no fairy that's going to come in the middle of the night and anoint you with everything you need to be successful as a manager or supervisor. But you look to others, you learn along the way, and you trust the people that you're privileged to serve.
And speaking kind of trailblazing, you were the first female ADOT director, and now Jennifer Toth, Director Toth, is the second female director. How has the landscape changed for female leaders in transportation, would you say, over the last few decades?
Oh, it's a great question. You know, I remember going to transportation-type meetings with ASHTO, Washington, and other places, and there was no line at the ladies' room. I'll tell you, the men were all standing in line, but there were so few of us there. But I think that what we needed to do to prove ourselves, and as a non-engineer, I needed to do that even more so, is to know that we knew what was going on and how things were happening. And that I think paved the way for women to be much more accepted. And I remember Jen Toth as a young mother working up in the Kingman district, and just saw such capability in her that I'm so pleased that she's now the director of ADOT. And
you moved from being ADOT director to DC as the Federal Highway Administration Administrator, and then on to be appointed as the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Victor Mendez, who followed you, also moved to DC to be FHWA Administrator. What do you think it is about Arizona that has put, people like yourself and others in these national roles? What do you think about Arizona has led to that?
I think Arizona, being a leader and moving and innovating and things like that, was one of the roles that really helped people recognize a secretary or a director from ADOT moving on up in the organization. But the other thing was that both Victor and I, and he was my deputy for a period of time, engaged on a national level about what was going on, how highway bills were being reauthorized in Congress, transit bills, things like that. So even though we worked very hard here in Arizona to make things move quickly here, we also stayed engaged on the national stage there also. And I think that probably is what gave us both the opportunity to move on into the Federal Transportation Department.
And compared to most other states, just the growth Arizona has seen in these past 50 years since ADOT became a state department. Do you think that, and the fact that there's been so much change, really getting that almost a blank canvas, do you think that plays a role in the experience that our top leaders get here?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I can remember meeting with President Bush as I was being considered for the Federal Highway Administrator, and he said it was important for him to have someone who'd been on the receiving end of those programs, know what they were and know where the bottlenecks were and how to fix things like that. So, and again, we talked about, we were the first state in the nation, first area in the nation to have a local option tax that funded transportation. And so that was very leading edge at the time. And other things that we did in the state certainly caught the attention of those on a national level.
And you've mentioned a couple of neat little stories about things that maybe show how things were a little bit different a couple of decades back than now. What are some other experiences or stories from when you were director or from when you worked at ADOT that kind of show how the times have changed?
Well, I think being much more interested in a multimodal transportation program. And that, back in the onset before 1974, it was more of a public roads department, as I said earlier. And so building and maintaining the transportation infrastructure was of the most importance. But as time went on, and as you said, the tremendous growth that our state was experiencing, we had to think smarter about how to build transportation projects, not just highways and bridges and roads and things like that, but also transit, having an opportunity to bring intelligent transportation system into play so that we could manage our traffic better and get more, I always use the term throughput. We get more throughput through the transportation system when we paid attention to how it was operating as well. And I always said that traffic is like live electricity. You want to pay attention to it. It's really important, but there are ways that we can manage traffic to get more people through a place at a given time. But looking also at transit as an option, and people would say, transit will never work in the Phoenix area. It's too spread out, it'll never work. Well, it's working beautifully, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity to be part of that.
Yeah, and continuing to expand.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So kind of last question, we're 50 years now, and now moving forward, what do you see in ADOT's future, and how can the great group of leaders that ADOT has help the agency get there?
Well, I think that we're well positioned because we've come this far. And again, looking to the future, not just to the past in terms of what we do. We have things coming on board like artificial intelligence. There are different modes. Who knows? Maybe that cartoon story, The Jetsons, may come true at some point in time. So those are things that I think we will pay attention to and move in the future. But one thing that I should have said perhaps earlier, paying attention to the people we serve, and that we're building transportation projects, not just to edify ourselves, but for the people we serve. And Jen Toth was so good at that, has been so good at that, of making sure that the transportation projects that we build, whether it's transit, highways, or who knows what's going to be in the future, are done for the people we serve, not in spite of the people we serve. And really paying attention to what our customers need. That is going to help us in the future. Probably the other thing about Arizona DOT, we have 2 larger urban areas, and then there's the rest of the state, which more or less rural. I mean, certainly Pinal County is less rural now as well. But to pay attention to what people in those areas need, and not just what the people in the municipal areas where there's such heavy traffic need, because they've got to get to the doctor's office. They've got to get their kiddos to school. They've got to get to work as well. And so having that juxtaposition of urban and rural, I think, is really important.
Well, Mary Peters, the former ADOT director and served in D.C. in such important roles, we're very excited that you were able to join us and give us some of that background and great information as we celebrate ADOT's 50th anniversary. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John.